Hello. Welcome to the MRO show presented by Chadwell Supply. Chadwell Supply is 100% dedicated to the multifamily industry. Your order in our truck, delivered the next day. Learn more at chadwellsupply.com. I'm your host, Michelle Childers. Today on the MRO show, we're recording live from our wonderful booth here at Apartmentalize in Philadelphia. And we have a very special guest today, my good friend, mentor, and many other things, Stephanie Puryear. Stephanie, welcome. We are so excited to have you here today. And I really enjoyed your seminar this morning with Dr. Debbie Phillips and your good friend, Susan, and my friend, Susan Sheffield. And y'all were talking about the circle of trust and how that circle of trust really brings in the foundation for success with teams. And so I want to talk to you a little bit today about that. But before we get into it, I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about you and your journey as to how you are and what you're doing now, because I think that plays into this trust factor a lot. And just give them a little bit of background for me real quick.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for having me here on the MRO show. So I'm Stephanie Puryear, and this is my 32nd, yes, 32, 32nd year in the industry. And it's been a fun journey and a wild ride. Like many people, there's stories that you've heard. I started off as a leasing professional while in college, walked in to an apartment community in downtown Austin, and walked out with a beautiful 2-story apartment overlooking downtown and a job. And I paid $100 a month. It's pretty amazing. I thought it would be a fun thing to do while I was in college. I was pre-med and thought I was going to be a doctor. I served some time in the Army National Guard. I was a combat medic. So I really thought that was my path. Yes. And in fact, I was wearing my little veteran pin earlier. So I really thought it was going to be a temporary thing, but like many people in the industry, they sort of happened into it and it became this career. And for me, it's been a phenomenal career. I've worn many different hats and, I'm so thankful for this industry because obviously I get to not only work with people like you, but people who've become lifelong friends and who've really impacted my life. So I've worn many hats on the operations side, on site is where I started. So leasing assistant manager, community manager. And then really since probably 10 years into my journey, I've been in learning and development or people development in some form or fashion.
And I guess that's when I met you.
Yeah.
Was when you were the Gray Star and doing all of their training and development. And also NAAEI, and you came in and trained our whole board with the apartment association and some leadership skills.
Well, we were both chairing at the same time. So while I was president of EI, you were NSC chair, and that was the year of the woman because Cindy Clare was chairwoman. That was pretty awesome. So I've always had a passion for developing people and teams. When I was a little girl, just a quick aside, in terms of my passion to always want to help people, I wanted to be a lifeguard in the summer and a nurse in the winter because I love the beach and I didn't want to miss out on the fun, but I always wanted to help people. So a couple of years ago, I started off my own business in consulting, speaking, and executive coaching, which was a natural fit because I've been doing that anyway, but inside management companies. And now I get to do that for other companies, both management companies, supplier partners, and companies that are not even in this industry because everyone needs leadership development. Definitely. Everyone needs help with navigating change and being not only resilient themselves, but building resilient teams and then improving the overall customer experience. So that's all about me in a nutshell.
Well, it's a lot. I mean, seriously, you have done so many things in your career. And I think that's what led you to where you are now, working with John Maxwell and working with all of these wonderful professionals. But what is it that you really makes you tick as far as and makes you want to work with the multifamily industry. You could work with any industry now, and I know that you do some
Yeah.
things outside of this industry, but what is it about those multifamily people that just keep bringing you back in to work with them?
Sure. Well, I've always said that multifamily is like Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can
Yeah.
never leave.
I
And so, how
agree.
many people do you know that have tried to leave multifamily and then they're back for their second, their third, maybe their fourth tour?
Yeah.
So, you can't really ever leave
Right.
because you have to be a little crazy
Yes.
and you have to be a whole lot of fun and you have to be really and have an entrepreneurial spirit, regardless of what size company you work for. I think what makes this industry special is, we're all in this trade show floor right now, competitor after competitor after competitor. And you've got people from management companies, huge management companies, global to little tiny, and we're all competing with one another. But it's very friendly and we're very open and we share and we want to help each other do better and grow. And in my experience, I think that's a very unique characteristic of this industry. And I love that because, when we celebrated our 75th year NAA several years ago, our slogan was, "We are family, multifamily."
I
And
remember that.
I really feel that, right? You have so many passionate people who truly care about obviously the products and the services that they offer, but at the end of the day, it's a people business. And I think like the friendships and relationships and connections that we make in this industry are unique from what I've seen elsewhere. And I love that. It fuels me. Yeah.
Well, and I know that we have developed a special relationship through this industry and through the association itself. And I'm very thankful for that
Me
relationship.
too.
I know that this topic of leadership and trust is something that's really important to you. It's also important to me. We've had conversations on the patio that have gone on endlessly.
Yeah.
We've had dinners that we have discussed leadership and what's important in leadership. And this morning, when I attended the seminar, it was very interesting to me to kind of go through like that whole nurturing process. So, like, there's the startup of the trust. Can you tell me it kind of go through that, your thought journey of where y'all were going from here's how you gain the trust to the nurturing, maintaining the trust, just a little bit for our audience? Because I thought it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, you bet. So, as you mentioned, our topic was the circle of trust, the foundation of high performing teams. And it truly is the foundation. And, we surveyed the audience and asked them about their experience in their own organizations, with their teams, with their peers, on whether or not they felt safe, for example, speaking to their supervisor if they had a particular issue, whether or not they thought that there was a high level of trust at their organization or on their teams. And we asked people to be candid and vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've probably all experienced in our life circumstances where there was high trust, whether it was a personal or professional relationship, and what that felt and looked like. And we've all experienced in our lives, where trust maybe never existed, or perhaps it existed and it was broken. Sometimes when that's broken, there are strategies that we shared today that you can use to repair that trust, but sometimes it's not repairable. So, our goal in this session was really to help leaders and teams understand that trust really is the foundation for everything. Without it, you are not going to be as successful. You're not going to make as much money. You're not going to have a great level of employee engagement.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to reach your goals, and we all, we work hard. We work hard, we play hard, but we spend more time with the people that we work with on a daily basis than we do our family and our friends. And if you don't have that foundation of trust, you're just not, you're going to be going through life miserable. So if we think about starting out with trust, one of the things that we shared, and this comes from Stephen Covey. So a few of the thought leaders that we referenced, there were three primary, but I'm going to throw in a fourth one that I threw in at the end of our session. So John C. Maxwell, and you mentioned when I started my company, I aligned myself with John Maxwell. I'm a certified John Maxwell leadership coach, member, executive director. So I pulled from John because he's one of the leading experts in the world on leadership and trust. Then I also pulled from Patrick Lencioni, who has written a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Many people have heard about that. I've facilitated sessions on that. He talks a lot about the foundation of trust. And then lastly, we pulled from Stephen Covey, both Stephen R. Covey and Stephen R.M. Covey, father and son, who wrote a book, The Speed of Trust. And there were a lot of common themes in what they shared.
I noticed that, yeah.
So if you remember, one of the things that we shared was a quadrant that talked about how people just sort of naturally either maybe are highly trusting, just that's their sort of baseline, or the opposite. Some people are very distrusting. So we all come from a baseline, partially based on just who we are as people, but a lot of that is based on how we were raised, experiences, traumas, all of those things.
Definitely the traumas. I know that I've experienced that with some employees in the past with their distrust of every single one of the employees, of myself, and having to gain them and let them know that they were in a loved environment and that everything that happened to them, where they were before growing up, that wasn't life,
right.
Like, it is what you make of it and what you allow, but you have to allow people in too. So,
you do.
I think that it trust is one of those things. Whew, if it's broken, it's hard to fix.
Yeah.
But
and some people tend to be more forgiving.
Yeah.
Others are not, right?
Yeah.
But I think for all of us, we all have to sort of earn the trust of someone else, and others have to earn it from us. Although Susan and I joked that we tend to be the people that are sort of have that blind trust in the beginning.
Yes.
Although I think over time, I'm probably in that quadrant too, which is earned trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, the whole, beginning point, everyone starts at a different baseline.
Right.
And then we talked about strategies for building trust. How do you do that? So a lot of what we were talking about was communication, connection, and character. And that comes from John, right?
Right.
And so when you're trying to connect with someone, do you have an ulterior motive?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you truly just trying to connect with that person, get to know them, make them feel seen, heard, and valued?
Yeah. I struggle with that thing sometimes when do they have an ulterior motive why they are trying to get close to me? Is it because they want to get close to someone who I'm friends with? Or is it truly they want to know me, you know? So I struggle with that one sometimes on the trust level.
Same, but I don't know. It's probably because you and I are empathic and we can kind of read people. Can you not tell when someone is being genuinely curious about who you are versus salesy?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And so I used to train sales, and I would tell salespeople all the time, yes, you need to understand closing techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need to understand feature benefit selling. Yes, you need to identify needs. All of those things are important.
Right.
But are you truly focusing on connecting with that person as a human?
Right. And
that
I think that's one of those points that is, and if you take it into the property management world and with the manager and with the maintenance staff, one of the things that keeps coming back when I'm working with the groups, and we've been doing some maintenance surveying with the National Apartment Association's Operations Committee.
Awesome.
Right. And so, in fact, little plug there, we're going to be sending out a maintenance survey really soon. But I've been doing on the front end of it, of trying to come up with some of the questions that we're going to be asked, actually surveying our maintenance out there and asking them, why is it that you like being in this business, and what brought you into this business, and what is it that you don't like about it, which a lot of them say on call, and then, what are they doing to overcome that on call thing. But one of the things that I was very surprised about, because we saw some really high ratings of trust in that room today, was that they did not feel valued, or they didn't feel trusted by their manager.
Yeah.
They didn't, and that's a problem. So I
Huge.
was so happy to hear you all deliver this message this morning, because hopefully some of the managers who are in that room, who are the ones who don't trust their maintenance guy when he says, hey, this condensing unit needs to be replaced, we can't repair it anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important topic, and I thought that was very interesting, that maintenance, they sometimes have that issue with a manager of not trusting. What are some of the things that manager might be able to do, or stop? You talked about stop, continue, or eliminate, right?
Yep.
So start, stop, eliminate, whatever.
Yeah. So as we sort of wrapped up the session, there were a lot of nuggets of knowledge thrown, and I asked each leader in the room to think about what resonated with them. And based on what we shared, what were 3 things that they could stop doing as a leader that were probably eroding trust, right? What are 3 things that they could start doing that maybe they haven't thought about? And what are 3 things that they're doing well, right? To build or nurture trust that they should continue doing. So, to answer your question specifically in terms of managers and maintenance, and I'm just going to say in jobs in general, when you have a supervisor that's not trusting their team member to make the right decisions, I would ask questions. So first and foremost, why don't you trust them to make the right decisions? Is it lack of training? Like, do they not understand the budget? Well, then, that's on the manager. Did you explain that, right? Do they not trust them to make the right decision because they've had bad experiences in the past, where maybe they did have someone who wasn't doing the right thing in terms of fiduciary responsibility?
Yeah.
I mean, you really need to dig in more, right? But
Yeah.
I would put the onus on that leader to examine, why aren't you trusting your team? Because at the end of the day, we're hiring people to do jobs, and we should be hiring competent people and giving them enough of a framework to understand what the guidelines are, but then enough freedom and independence to do the job that we hired them to do.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel that you can give your team autonomy to make the right decisions, then I would say look in the mirror and examine your hiring practices and your leadership.
Maybe you don't need to be that leader.
I mean,
maybe.
Honestly, right?
Yeah.
So
we talked a little bit in your session also about the speed of trust.
So
and speeding up that process, and some of the things that I think there were probably about 15 items on that list. If we could kind of go through a little bit and expand a little bit on some of those items that you feel like, because I know that there are some that you feel more of a connection, more important for our teams, and especially when we're thinking about the relationship between teammates, the supervisor to employee.
Yep.
Relationship and getting that trust level built up, because like you said, once the trust level is there and everyone on the team is trusting one another, then the property operates better. We hold each other accountable, and everybody wants to work together, right?
Absolutely.
And then somebody always leaves once you get to that level, and then they start their whole new team over again.
And then you have to do the forming, norming, storming, all those things.
But I would love for you to share with our audience a few of your favorites, because I know there's 15 of them.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on quickly the 5 dysfunctions of a team, because I mentioned that with Patrick Lencioni. So of the 5 dysfunctions, the number one is lack of trust. And that is at the bottom. It's the foundation. If you don't have trust, I said this earlier, but it's worth repeating. If you do not have trust on your team, nothing else will work. Period. End of story.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And the goal is to move from dysfunction to function. So the opposite of no trust is having high trust. And when teams have high trust, they make more money and it's a dividend, right? Versus a tax.
Oh, what was that? What was that?
Yeah.
What was
so
the
lack
quote?
of trust is a tax.
Yes.
And high trust is a dividend.
I love that.
Love it. So that leads us to the speed of trust. And I have had the benefit of not only hearing John Maxwell speak in person, but I've had the benefit of hearing Patrick Lencioni speak in person, as well as Stephen Covey. And that's where we're going to land. Okay. So Stephen Covey and the speed of trust, and there are 15. I am going to run through them quickly, but I'm going to pick 2 or 3 to expand on.
Yes, please.
So in the speed of trust, the 15 principles that are most important to really understand and implement is, as I've mentioned, and this comes from all 3 of these experts, that trust is the foundation. Number 2, and I mentioned this, trust affects speed and cost. The higher the trust, the higher you get things done, the less expensive things are.
Sounds like something that maintenance might want to consider.
Trust begins with self-trust. So remember, I mentioned that quadrant earlier, and the bottom quadrant is someone who has high distrust, and it said they trust only themselves. I would argue oftentimes they don't even trust themselves. So if you don't trust yourself as a leader, how on earth can you trust others? So I think examining, looking in the mirror, who you are, and do you trust your own decisions? Declaring your intent and assuming positive intent. That was one that I felt was really highly important. And as I mentioned, one of our leaders at a company that I worked for really talked about assuming positive intent. And I think that's huge. Giving people grace and the benefit of the doubt when you're communicating with them, and rather than immediately being judgmental or thinking you know what happened, remaining curious, asking more questions, and assuming positive intent. Yeah. The next one is competence builds trust. So as I mentioned in our session, being competent as a leader is hugely important to gain the trust from your team. Have you ever worked for someone that you felt wasn't competent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you trust them?
No.
I mean, it's that simple, right?
But I don't think they trusted me. And I think that one of the problems is that they possibly felt like I was after their job, maybe, which that was not the case at all. But I am a bit,
you're a go-getter.
Yeah, I'm a go-getter. And so I was more than happy to build, but that was a very dysfunctional relationship there for a while. But once we did get to the point where they knew I was not after their job and that they could depend on me, once that trust was built, then, we worked together for, another 6 years loving one another. So, but it took a while. They came in and they had to learn me and I had to learn them.
Well, and I would point that back to the lack of trust being about ego, which oftentimes as leaders or just as humans, ego can get in the way. So the fact that someone felt that maybe you were after their job, instead of looking at it through a different lens and saying, wow, this person's a go-getter, I can leverage that. And I'm glad you guys worked through it.
Yes.
Because that goes to show that you can build trust and then nurture it. But it starts with understanding self first and what you contribute to that, and then really taking the time to understand others. And I know we're running out of time, and I would love to continue this conversation, but I'm gonna end it there because a lot of what I do before I start off with leadership development is I encourage people to assess themselves, and I'm an assessment geek, so I use DISC and strengths.
Yes.
But oftentimes leaders are great because they're good at the business, or they've been in a position for a long time. And so they get title after title,
Mhm.
but they haven't necessarily spent the time to really do some self-discovery and do a deep dive to figure out, okay, what are my strengths? Where are my opportunities for improvement? And how do I
Mhm.
leverage that to also understand my team better? And all of that, in my opinion, is so crucial to building and nurturing trust with teams.
I can't agree with you more.
Yeah,
And I would love to have another patio conversation about this
absolutely.
and wrap up the other 10 or so
Yeah.
items that we did not get to cover today.
I would love that.
And thank you so much,
Thank
Stephanie, for
you.
being here with us and being a part of our Apartmentalized 2024. And we look forward to having you come back and be a guest in the future with us as well. And I want to thank all of our listeners
Thank
for
you.
taking the time
Love
out
you,
today.
friend.
Yes.
Thank
I
you
love
so
you too.
much. Okay.
Taking the time out today to listen to our MRO show.
And that's a wrap.